proposing to avoid jail time, a wedding that turned into a memorial, and getting diagnosed by Dr. Oz. He may be known for tracking down criminals on TV, but Dog the Bounty Hunter's personal life has seen problems of its own. At age 13, Dwayne Chapman, better known decades later by his nickname Dog, quit school and joined a motorcycle gang. Chapman would eventually be convicted of robbery charges on 18 separate occasions, and in the late 70s, he landed in prison on a first-degree murder charge. As he recalled in the program Profiles, Chapman was with some fellow gang members when the group went to a house to buy marijuana, and things went awry.
There was a confrontation with my friend inside. I heard 2 shots, the 4 of us being out in the car, boom, boom. He came outside, he had been shot.
Chapman took him to a hospital, returned to the scene of the crime, and discovered that his friend Jerry Oliver had been shot as well, but seemed stable. However, Oliver died overnight, and a manhunt for Chapman ensued. Texas law at the time didn't allow for a reduced charge as an accessory, so Chapman was convicted of murder and served 18 months of a 5-year prison sentence. Upon his release, he swore off crime. Recalling to the New York Times, "I looked in the mirror to shave and heard my dad saying, 'Burn your birth certificate. I wish you were never born.' I said, I'm going to change and be the best at whatever I do in the world." As a teenager in Colorado in the 1970s, Chapman carried on a relationship with a woman named Debbie White. At the same time, Chapman was dating LaFonda Sue Honeycutt, who would later become his first wife. After entering prison later in the decade, he never saw White again, but he later learned that she had died by suicide just before he got out of prison. More than 2 decades later, Chapman received a phone call from White's mother, where he learned that White had been pregnant with his child the last time he saw her. Now an adult, Christopher Michael Hecht was in prison at the time Chapman learned of his existence, convicted of committing a hate crime. As Chapman wrote in his book, "You can run, but you can't hide. After all these years, I finally discovered I have another son, and he's behind bars. It was more than I could bear. I knew what it felt like to be a young man who made foolish choices." They reconnected after a jailhouse meeting, although Hecht would continue to face legal problems. During his stint at a Texas prison for murder, Chapman was visited by a process server who presented the inmate with divorce papers. As Chapman wrote in "You Can Run, But You Can't Hide," LaFonda had fallen in love with Jim Darnell, one of my best friends. I was heartbroken. Upon his release from prison in 1979, Chapman attended a biker party in a Colorado motel and met a woman named Ann, with whom he felt an instant mutual attraction. After they were intimate, Ann informed Chapman that she was only 17. He was led to believe that what they'd just done was a crime, and thus a parole violation. In order to legally cover his tracks, Chapman proposed marriage, writing in his book, "I didn't love Ann. I married her out of desperation, to keep my freedom." Ann became pregnant from her first sexual encounter with Chapman. The marriage quickly fell apart, and the baby tragically died not long after his 1980 birth. Chapman and Beth Smith were a couple on-screen and off for many years before they decided to get married in Hawaii in 2006. The night before Chapman's wedding, his daughter Barbara Chapman died in Fairbanks, Alaska. According to reports by state troopers, Barbara was the passenger in an SUV driven by a friend who lost control of the vehicle, causing it to depart from the road, collide with trees, and flip upside down. Alaskan authorities were able to locate Chapman and inform him of his daughter's death at the age of 23 on the morning of May 20th, a few hours before he was set to walk down the aisle. After talking with the officiant, Chapman decided to carry on with the wedding and told relatives and guests about Barbara's death at the reception, which became an impromptu and somber celebration of life. Upon her death, Barbara Chapman left behind a son to be raised by his father, Travis Mims Sr. After various disputes, Chapman and Mims filed for mutual temporary restraining orders against one another. In 2011, the ongoing legal matter reached a Hawaii courtroom after Mims was accused of excessively and violently disciplining Dwayne Chapman's 9-year-old grandson. A neighbor captured an audio recording of Mims yelling profanities at the child and then striking him as many as 13 times. In a written court filing, Chapman asked for temporary custody of the child so that Mims could attend parenting classes, saying in the filing, "I know Travis Sr. loves his son, and I know it's very difficult to be a single parent at such a young age, but I love my grandson and only want what's best for him." To hear the audio tape of my grandson being abused was torture. Chapman was granted temporary custody of Travis Mims Jr. However, Mims Sr. didn't back down and was later heard on audio leaked to a tabloid, denying any and all claims of child abuse and threatening to hurt the neighbors who had recorded him hitting his child. Chapman fathered over a dozen children, and the home life he provided for some of his offspring was reportedly traumatic and damaging. One daughter, Lisa Chapman, became pregnant at 14. Lisa and her daughter lived in a trailer owned by her mother. Too young to receive any government assistance, she paid the $500 rent via babysitting while still using drugs. This all happened in the early 2000s, and she was unable to get help from her father, who by then was an increasingly prominent public figure thanks to Dog the Bounty Hunter. Chapman had allegedly distanced himself from Lisa after she falsely accused him of sexually assaulting her when she was 11 years old. As she told Fox News, "Because of my accusations against him, I really felt he thought I was a threat. Everything he had built, he didn't want me to hurt. It was a horrible life that I never wanted to go back to, living with him and Beth and the fighting and the drugs."
At the time when you're young, you don't really realize the bad situation that you're in, but now that I've become an adult and I tell people my story, they're so shocked and amazed.
She later withdrew the accusation, claiming instead that she'd been assaulted by one of Chapman's friends. After a 2011 arrest for disturbing the peace, Lisa Chapman estranged herself from her mother and reconnected with her father, whom she forgives for his past transgressions due to his personal problems. As she told Fox News, "I feel like at the time he did the best he could do. He was really addicted to drugs and really couldn't get off of them." Chapman has been involved in several high-profile manhunts, including the search for Andrew Luster, heir to the Max Factor makeup fortune. In January 2003, a court in Ventura, California found Luster guilty of more than 80 criminal counts, with most of the counts being related to sexual assault. The jury voted on Luster's case in absentia because the defendant had fled the United States during a pause in the trial and after posting a $1 million bail. In June 2003, Luster was apprehended in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, by a bounty hunter team led by Chapman. This was just months before Chapman would make his reality TV debut on the series Take This Job. While Luster would be extradited back to the U.S. to begin serving a prison sentence, initially set at 124 years, Chapman and his associates remained wanted by authorities in Mexico, where bounty hunting is legally viewed as akin to kidnapping. In 2006, after he'd become a TV star, Chapman was apprehended in Hawaii and charged with illegal detention and conspiracy for his role in tracking down Luster. Facing extradition, trial, and imprisonment in Mexico, Chapman found himself free of legal issues in 2007 when a judge decided that prosecutors had waited too long to start legal proceedings. It's Chapman's profession to bring fugitives back to the criminal justice system, so he's likely made a lot of enemies in his decades of work as a bounty hunter. Still, it must have been unsettling when in 2012, he and his family were the subject of a series of particularly violent death threats. The first threat, sent via email, claimed that the author was going to kill both Chapman and his family. 2 days later, a similar email full of specific and violent threats arrived, followed by another the next day. The Chapmans reported the messages to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, which launched an investigation out of a field office in Hawaii, where Dwayne and Beth Chapman lived at the time. No arrests were ever announced in relation to the case. After the death of his mother in 1995, Chapman coped with substance abuse, developing an addiction to crack cocaine. He then reconnected with Beth Smith, nearly a decade after they met in the 80s, when he was her bail bondsman on a shoplifting charge. Chapman found sobriety, and he and Smith became romantic and bounty hunting partners, co-starring on Dog the Bounty Hunter and marrying in 2006. Beth Chapman was diagnosed with throat cancer just before production began on the WGN America reality series Dogs Most Wanted. What was supposed to be a revival of Dog the Bounty Hunter became a sad and poignant document of the Chapmans' final days together, as well as Beth Chapman's process of treating and accepting her terminal illness. Showrunner Matt Osmus told the New York Times, Beth was adamant. She wanted everything filmed.
I have to document what I'm going through because my whole life, I have been an example to other people.
After attempting chemotherapy on multiple occasions, Beth decided against pursuing the physically difficult cancer treatment regimen. As Dogs Most Wanted wore on, she lost weight and hair, and her health noticeably declined. In June 2019, Beth Chapman died from cancer. She was 51. In September 2019, less than 3 months after the death of Beth Chapman, Dwayne Chapman experienced chest pains and difficulty breathing. He was briefly hospitalized in Colorado before refusing further treatment and heading back home.
I think basically I had a broken heart. And of course, it's gonna heal.
Weeks later, Chapman's friend, television host Dr. Mehmet Oz, arranged for an intervention and the medical test that Dog had skipped. Oz's diagnosis? A pulmonary embolism, a blockage in the arteries that serve the lungs, which can lead to a fatal loss of oxygen. Chapman was also diagnosed with gout. The bounty hunter believes that the embolism was caused by his use of testosterone supplements, which may have dangerously thickened his blood. When doctors in Colorado had attempted to address the issue, he'd aggressively refused treatment, admitting to the New York Times that he shoved an orderly against the wall who tried to stop him from leaving. Oz recalled to the Times, Dog told me a dream where Beth said, Big Daddy, what took you so long? Maybe she's waiting. What am I living for? After the medical episode, Chapman decided to take better care of himself by losing weight and cutting down on his smoking habit. In recent years, for Dog and Beth on the Hunt and Dogs Most Wanted, Chapman's team added a new cast member and cohort in David Robinson, assisting with bounty hunter work both for the benefit of the cameras and when shows weren't in production. Chapman told TMZ in December 2022 that Robinson spent years as his right-hand man. That was right around the time when Robinson died suddenly at home. After losing consciousness during a Zoom call in his dining room, Robinson couldn't be revived. Medical personnel arrived and were unable to save Robinson, who died in the arms of his wife, Brooke, purported to have had a stroke or cardiac event. Robinson's autopsy later showed that he died from undiagnosed critical coronary artery disease. He was 50 years old. If you or anyone you know is struggling with addiction issues, help is available. Visit the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration website or contact SAMHSA's National Helpline at 1-800-662-HELP. That's 1-800-662-4357.